Like and subscribe right now, or you're going to have terrible luck for the next week. The size of a ship is determined by three major parameters: the deadweight tonnage, the overall length, and the gross tonnage. The deadweight tonnage is how much weight a ship can carry, while gross tonnage refers to the internal volume of the ship. Overall length, on the other hand, is the maximum length of a ship's hull measured parallel to the waterline. That sounded like a lot, I know, but in this video, we look at 10 ships with the biggest of these measurements. Here we go. Number 10. OOCL Hong Kong. Our first ship is among the largest container ships ever built with a length of 400 meters. As a container ship, Hong Kong has a capacity of 21,413 20-foot equivalent units, or TEUs. This is basically the unit used to measure the capacity of container ships and denotes the number of 20-foot containers that a ship can carry when full. Ships with more capacity, like Hong Kong, can take advantage of the economies of scale, but on the other hand, they might be restricted to where they can travel to by the size of ports or some good old regulation. For instance, both the Singapore Strait and the Suez Canal, some of the most important waterways, have a size limit on the ships they allow through. Still, on size, the OOCL Hong Kong boasts a gross tonnage of nearly 211,000, which is still remarkable outside the container ship world. It's no surprise that she's considered the lead ship of the G-class fleet, a group of 6 container ships delivered in 2017 to the Orient Overseas Container Line Company in Hong Kong. The other babies in this fleet include Indonesia, Germany, the United Kingdom, Japan, and Scandinavia. Number 9. MOL Triumph. The MOL Triumph is just about the same length as the OOCL Hong Kong, but it's dwarfed by the latter in gross tonnage. She averages just about 199,900 gross tonnage. But still, she's way bigger than most ships out there. In fact, she ranks at position 7 in terms of size among container ships. And before other entrants deem her light a bit, the MOL Triumph was the first ship to reach a capacity of 20,000 20-foot equivalent units. And even beyond its container peers, it was once the largest ship in the world. Besides that, Triumph also possesses other modifications that are of great importance when it comes to navigating the high seas. These include highly efficient rudder and propeller and low-friction underwater plant. To combine greatly reduce water resistance, which saves significant amounts of energy. Construction of this mammoth ship was completed in March 2017 in South Korea. She set off on her maiden trip the next month with several ports like Dalian, Qingdao, and Shanghai along the Chinese coast before landing in Singaporean waters. Number 8. Oasis class ships. For number 8 in this video, we'll focus on a group of ships, the Oasis class ships, instead of just a single one. The group is made up of 4 complete vessels, though 2 others are in the offing. One of these 2, named Wonder of the Seas, is already under construction, while the fate of the other is yet to be known, although it has already been ordered. But to the finished vessels. The first ship to be released into the waters was the Oasis of the Seas in 2009, followed by Allure of the Seas the next year. These 2 were later formed by the Harmony of the Seas that was delivered in 2016, and finally the Symphony of the Seas in 2018. Number 7. USS Enterprise. The USS Enterprise was a United States Navy aircraft carrier that was officially decommissioned on February 3, 2017. Looking at the timeline of the ship's operations, it was such an adventurous 55-year run. Built and commissioned in the 1960s, she was the first nuclear-powered aircraft carrier and remains the longest naval vessel to ever be built. Also, she was a one-of-a-kind vessel, especially with a radar system that was quite advanced compared to other similar systems. The ship had an overall length of 342 meters and could hold a crew of 4,600 members during her time. As a warship, Enterprise was on more than a dozen missions around the world. The very first one being the Cuban Missile Crisis that saw the U.S. block delivery of military equipment to Cuba. After this, the ship was included in other conflicts, including the Vietnam War, in South Korea when North Korea captured a U.S. spy ship, and during the Iraqi War of 2003 to 2004. Number 6. Burj Style. MS Burj Style was the largest bulk carrier from 1986 when it was built up to 2011 when a new entrant took over. She's around 342 meters in overall length, and has a gross tonnage of slightly over 175,000. At capacity, Style can load up approximately 365,000 tons of dead weight. The massive size, though impressive, limited Style to just about 2 ports at a time. One was off the Brazilian coast, while the other was Europort off the Dutch coast, so her route was pretty much between the two. And even then, for these 2 ports, the ship's arrival was timed to sync with high tides to prevent it from running aground. So if the ship misses her stipulated arrival in Rotterdam, for instance, she'll have to wait for about 12 hours for a high enough tide before entering the port. Also, she cannot be loaded to her full deadweight capacity to reduce her drought and further reduce the risk of running aground. Number 5. MV Varzan. Here's another representative from the container ships world. MV Varzan, owned by the United Arab Shipping Company. With approximately 18,820 foot equivalent units, it pales in comparison to the likes of Hong Kong and MOL Triumph, but it's still a behemoth when you consider the overall length. At about 400 meters long, it stacks up perfectly to the other container piers. It's also not so way off, with gross tonnage coming up at about 200,000. This big girl has been in the sea since 2015, hauling containers between Asia and Europe, specifically through Shanghai and China, Singapore, and London, just to mention a few. But aside from the size, Varzan has another fascinating side, according to Hyundai Heavy Industries, the company that built the ship. It's said to be way more lenient with its carbon emissions as compared to many of its earlier peers. This hasn't been independently confirmed, but it'll be a good thing if it's indeed true. Number 4. TI Class. The TI Class supertankers made history as the first ultra-large crude oil carrier to be constructed in more than 2 decades. This was back in 2003 when the 4 vessels were released into the high seas. At the time, they were named Hellespont Tara, Hellespont Alhambra, Hellespont Metropolis, and Hellespont Fairfax. But their names changed to TI Europe, TI Asia, TI Africa, and TI Oceania, a year later after they were sold to a Belgian ship company. All the ships were just about the same size, with overall lengths of 380 meters with a gross tonnage of 234,000. Today, these supertankers don't go on voyages, but are moored off various coasts where they've been converted into floating storage and offloading vessels. TI Asia and TI Africa were the first to go this route in 2009 and 2010 respectively. They're both moored off the Qatari coast at an oil field. TI Europe later followed suit in 2017 and is now held off the Malaysian coast. Oceania is the last to be moored off in Malaysia, but there are plans to move it to Singapore. Number 3. Battleless Class. Though now scrapped, the Battleless Class supertankers were once the largest ships by gross tonnage to ever be built. There were 4 of them constructed from 1979 in a span of 3 years. Battleless and Balamia were the first to be built in 1976, after which came the Pierre Guillemot in 1977. Prairial was the last one and landed in the high seas in 1979. They averaged over 275,000 GT and had impressive overhaul lengths of 414 meters. All those lengths, the ships would still rank high in today's maritime transportation world. The history of ships, these supertankers rank second to only the Seawise Giant, the largest ship ever. This is considering both the length and the deadweight. All 4 of the ships in this class averaged at least 555,000 tons of deadweight and had displacements of over 630,000 tons when fully loaded. Now it's time for today's best pick. Today's photo was sent to us by a subscriber. So if you come across a photo online and want to know more details about it, just send it over to us. We might even feature it in a future video. Number 2. Seawise Giant. For our best pick, we'll be looking at the biggest ship ever, the Seawise Giant. At an overall length of 458 meters, this behemoth rivaled most of the tallest ships if it were to compete. She didn't score as high in gross tonnage though, but at over 260,000 GT, she was still impressively large, coming in at the 6th position beyond giants such as the Pioneering Spirit and the 4 Battleless Class supertankers. Besides the length, the Seawise Giant also ruled on the deadweight front with over 565,000 tons. It took about 5 years for this giant to be delivered after being ordered for in 1974. But she wasn't always called Seawise Giant, and she wasn't always that big. In the first year after construction, the ship was identified by its hull number, 1016. But after acquisition by a Hong Kong company, it was renamed, its length increased by a few meters, and the cargo capacity was increased by over 146,000 tons. Unfortunately, the ship sank after being hit during the Iran-Iraq War in 1988. It was written off shortly afterward, but a company salvaged and repaired the wreck. It was back in service in 1991 with a new name, Happy Giant. From here, it went through different ownerships and name changes before being scrapped in 2009. Before we move on, I've got a little challenge for you that'll take 5 seconds to complete. So here's the deal. You just leave a like on this video, smash that subscribe button, and hit the notification bell, and you'll get 25 years of amazing luck. Try it. It really works. Number 1. Pioneering Spirit. In terms of gross tonnage, the Pioneering Spirit is the largest vessel to ever be constructed to date. With about 403,000 GT, the ship's idea was conceived in the late 1980s, but it wasn't until 2004 when most serious groundwork began to take shape. That year saw the initial plan of converting 2 existing tankers discarded and replaced by a new hull built from scratch. A few reasons were given for this, like a lowered overall cost and lack of worthwhile tankers to convert. Swiss company Allseas Group took care of the designing of the South Korea Daewoo shipbuilding, and marine engineering brought the idea to life. The actual construction itself commenced in 2011 and took about 3 years and cost a whopping 2 billion euros. With an overall length of about 382 meters and a width of 124 meters, this massive ship was designed for single-lift installation and removal of components in an oil sector, specifically super heavy pipelines, and large oil and gas platforms. Its first such task was in the North Sea, off the Norwegian coast in 2016. Approximately 2 years after construction, it lifted about 13,500 tons of an offshore production unit, work that had been pending since 2013.